welcome to Phraktion's peer-to-peer webinar series, just to highlight to everyone as you came. I think you got a message that we are recording, and we'd like to use this session for future marketing purposes. So that's just the next slide, Ornah. So
yeah.
So I should actually introduce myself, and then I will. Ornah, of course. I'm co-founder at Phraktion. And Phraktion has a bold ambition, really, to begin changing how pharma works, and we're achieving that through a rapidly growing, trusted community of biopharma functional experts, many of which are online today, and we'll hear from Ornah as well in her particular area of expertise. And this speaks very well to the group being well connected together to deliver biopharma type projects, really solving any problem, either individually or as teams. And by doing so, we hope to shape future biopharma industry issues and really how we work to achieve projects around that. So just into the next slide, the most important bit today, Ornah. So first up to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ornah Levine-Dolberg, and she'll speak to us about Medical Affairs Alchemy. So there's alchemy on offer today at Phraktion, turning scientific gold into commercial currency. Now, Ornah comes with a rich background, specialist, actually, I think the first 10 years as a psychiatry expert in clinical practice, before the next 20 years, perhaps, in industry. She has comprehensive experience across a range of research and development to all facets of medical affairs on a country, regional, global level. Beyond that, Ornah is actually a proven launch expert and was instrumental in the rollout of a triple blockbuster drug, spearheading successful commercialization strategies in key markets like China and South Korea, certainly challenging markets, perhaps at the best of times, Ornah. So congratulations for that. And perhaps we'll hear more of that during your presentation. So with that, delighted to pass over to you, Ornah, to take us through your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Nigel. And thank you all for joining, choosing me over the sun and the football. I hope I'll live up to that. You won't say it wasn't a good choice. So as Nigel very kindly said, I'm a psychiatrist by training, spent about a decade in the hospital, so I kind of know what clinical work looks like, but also what challenges physicians are facing and the constraints of healthcare these days. And then I went into pharma, and I had started in drug development, moved over to medical affairs, increasing level of seniority. So what I'd like to talk about today is a potential way to address this never-ending issue that seems to be with medical affairs. And I'd like to give you a glimpse, which is really, it's just a kind of a tunnel into some ideas and tools that I've developed along with others in my team. We call this framework, it's a framework, Medical Affairs Alchemy, and it's focused on changing the way that medical affairs is perceived within a business. And it can be any size and any complexity of business. So with that, I'd like to walk you. You can see how long I've been in the industry by this. Every couple of years, there's another reason why medical affairs is not achieving its potential, or why it's not being perceived as a value partner, or why it is being perceived, but only as a support function. And 20 years ago, it was real-world evidence. If only medical affairs could bring good, high-quality, real-world evidence, then the value would be apparent to all parts of the organization. Then it moved on to PROs, patient-reported outcomes. Then it moved on to patient centricity. Then we were told that if we had a patient advisory board, that would really be valuable for the organization. And so it rolls out, and now we're talking, I just read this week about medical affairs and AI. If only we really rode this wave of AI, then medical affairs would be really a valued partner in the organization. And I kind of left some blanks because I'm sure next week or in 2 weeks, there will be another new thing or tool or an app or a toy that medical affairs can bring that will really elevate it in the organization. And it's not just where medical affairs is located in the organization and the hierarchy, it's also the perception. How valued is it? How do people with other types of background really appreciate what medical affairs is bringing? So I'm being a bit sarcastic about this, but I just wanted to make the point of where this framework that we've developed comes from. So, what's a basic issue with medical affairs? So one is, and I find this the least troublesome, is the lack of the commercial mindset. It's true that many physicians come to the industry from clinical backgrounds, but it takes some time sometimes, and it's also a mindset. It's true, but on the general, and if you look at people with a scientific or clinical background working in pharma industry, they do understand that they're working in a business, and they do understand how the business how the business values things. Siloed operations, well, that's true for pharma in general. That's not a specific problem with medical affairs, although it does exist in medical affairs as well. But the unmeasured, unquantified impact is where I see the key issue, because it's very hard to measure most of the work that medical affairs does in direct financial terms or benefit. And without clear metrics showing return on investment, it's very hard to articulate value in a persuasive fashion. Another thing is the complexity of activities of medical affairs. So medical affairs really spans a wide range of activities: evidence generation, educational events, grants, and investigator-sponsored studies, advisory boards, opinion leader management, insights, MSLs, therapeutic area leadership. The diversity of the work makes it very challenging to communicate a value story that is cohesive. It isn't sales. Sales are numbers. It isn't sales. It's a complex web of activities that is very hard to make it into a cohesive value story. The lack of internal champions. Well, one of the things that I hope that this framework does is actually create some internal champions for medical affairs, because it has the potential to turn around people who were skeptic or wanted to believe but didn't have a good reason to believe. And finally, it's the intangible value drivers. A good medical affairs function enhances corporate reputation, it improves stakeholder trust, and it improves patients' outcomes. These are critical benefits, but they're indirect, and it's very hard to quantify them. So what is medical affairs alchemy? I'm going to have to move you because I can't see. Ah, there it is. Okay. So what is medical affairs alchemy? It's a tested methodology. So I've done this for quite a few companies. It's being tried by fire. It's a methodology for architecting a tailored medical affairs operating model that resonates across the entire business spectrum. The basis of this methodology are several validated resources that crack the code on communicating medical affairs' worth in a language that provides a competitive advantage. Now, I'd like to stop here and say that I'm not going to be able to show you the entire methodology. I'm going to show you some tools that this methodology uses, and hopefully you will understand why I believe that these tools can make a change in the organization. There's also a lot of information that needs to be gathered before you employ these tools. So if you take one of these tools and just throw it out there, it's unlikely to be successful. There is a research phase and a rollout phase, and it's a methodology. There's a lot of work to it, and of course it's tailored. So you don't need, small businesses don't have to think, oh, we're a small company. What is suggested here is only good for big pharma. No, it is bespoke. It is fit for purpose. Small organization that has a medical affairs or wants to establish a medical affairs department can use this in a way that's fit for them. And large organizations, of course, can do more. Okay, so I call it speaking like a native, because what I believe is that part of the issue is that when medical affairs communicate our value, it falls on a bit of deaf ears, because the people we're talking to think about things differently. So regardless of the commercial setup, Medical Affairs Alchemy can provide tools to construct a framework that delivers tangible commercial value from the scientific excellence. And that's why we called it weaving the gold from the straw. From clinical data extrapolation to peer-to-peer engagement strategies, these tools help to provide the commercial translation. And that turns skeptics into advocates and scientific potential into market gains. Now, before I move on with this, one point I'd like to make, and I'll make it a few times in the presentation, is that all of this is done without compromising the ethical and compliance aspect of medical affairs, which I think is crucial. So none of this talks about sales or anything, or money or anything that would compromise the integrity in any way. All right, so the first tool I'm going to show today is infographics. Now, every time I show this, people say, really? Infographics? I mean, come on. Yes, it is simple, but it is an incredibly useful tool. I was a bit skeptic the first time I used it, but after I saw the buy-in on this, imitation being the sincerest form of flattery, as I saw commercials marketing started to use this as well, I realized that there's something about this that works. People like it. It's easy to understand. It's memorable, and it transcends organizational silos, and it can catalyze alignment around the function's diverse value drivers. I'd like to also make the point that of recent, one of the things that scientific communication is doing is infographics. So instead of posters or alongside posters, a lot of the data is communicated in infographics. So, well, why in medical affairs? Well, sorry, I need to yes. So visual storytelling is powerful. You can translate complex information into engaging visuals. Self-identification, which is not here on the slide, but it's a given. You can brand it. So you can brand it to the colors of medical affairs. A lot of companies, medical affairs has a logo or a color. It can be used in a product or a company. So it's customizable to the visual images of the company. It has a universal resonance that everyone can understand it. You can show impact without financials. Again, that is one of the key things. It's ethical and transparent, of course. So here's one of my favorite models of infographics. There are many, obviously. I've used this. I cannot count how many times I've used this. I used to call it Charlotte's Web, but not everyone is familiar with the book. So we now call it the spidergram. So spiders are your new best friend. And it has 8 axes, and of course the axes are customizable. You can choose what is right for your organization for any given time. Now, this is a specific example from a specific function in a specific company. And the scale here is 50%. So you can see this was a very immature organization. And field medical, for example, is at 0. So the function didn't even exist. What we did was we chose the 8 axes that were most important for medical affairs at that specific time, and did an assessment of where we are. You can use this to show progress or lack thereof. You can use this to do a snapshot. You can use this to show change. It's very easy to understand. It's very memorable. It can be branded easily with colors and logos and so on, fonts and all the usual things. But it's extremely communicative, and this resonates very, very well on all parts of the organization. And of course, whatever is important, you can deep dive into medical information and use a whole news spidergram for medical information. So it can be used within medical affairs or outside of it. I used to use this extensively in board meetings, and it became, I can tell you, it became a demand. So I found it to be, although in the beginning I was surprised, I found it to be extremely useful. So the second tool is levers and, sorry, should I stop for questions or?
Any questions, anyone?
Should I ask if there are any questions or?
I actually have a quick question for you.
Just
so I'm clear, what does the 30% under clinical development, just clarify for me what that means, progress, or what is that measure defining? Just so I'm clear.
Sorry, I didn't. You came and you went. I didn't hear you. I think my internet is not stable.
Oh, okay. Let me try that again. I'm just using the example under clinical development where that scattergram goes to 30%. Can you just clarify for me what that 30% measure means? What is that really meaning when I look at those different percentages there?
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think I got it. So like I said, this is a specific example from a specific organization. So you can use this to measure gaps, for example. So we chose clinical development planning, monitoring, protocol review, CRO selection, onboarding. This is a composite score. And we said, we'd like all this specific function to be at least all of them to be at least 50% when we, in order to, this was preparing for launch. And so we were looking at the gaps in the organization. So that's what you're seeing here. When we would address some of the issues, you could come back 6 months later and say, look, clinical development is now at 45%. So we've made progress. We're nearing our target, or the other way around. We haven't launched a field medical. It hasn't been approved. The budget isn't there, or whatever it is that the problem is. And so the organization can see gaps, progress, lack of progress, problem areas can be highlighted, and so on. And it's a good way of showing that things are getting done when they are. Did I answer your question, Tom? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, the second tool I'd like to talk to you about is levers and scoring. Levers and scoring are used in a kind of a triangular way. You look at the goal, the audience, and the impact. Goal being desired outcome, the audience is obvious. For internal stakeholders, how do you impact them? And the impact is obviously what the effect you want, what do you want to get budget? Do you want to get whatever it is you want to get? So this is another of our tools is be clever, be your lever. So choosing the assessment category is the critical issue. So what we did in this, again, it's a specific example from a medical affairs department. We decided on how we would assess various activities. So we would assess them against alignment with corporate strategy, which is one of the issues with medical, and I'll talk about that. The commercial enablement. So how much does this support, whatever it is, activity support commercial team and its activities? The clinical enablement. How much does this support the clinical development group and its activities? The medical functional readiness. How much is the relevance of the medical need for the function, given the maturity of the market. So this was also very market specific, and I'll show you a bit more about that too. Medical execution. So is the infrastructure there, the tools that we need, the web systems, the processes, the SOPs, the data repositories, and so on. Are they there, available, rolled out, ready to for medical execution? And of course, the compliance risk mitigation piece, which always goes hand in hand. And this is the definition of the priority initiatives. So, and again, this is a specific example. They could be completely different. There's okay. There is a question. I'll read it later. Sorry. This is a specific example from a medical affairs department that wanted to prepare for the next 3 months. So it's sort of the next 100 days. That was how it was defined for specific reasons that had to do with that company. And the first priority initiative was the governance modeling of clinical development. And the second was current organizational assessment. The third was future strategy and organizational development. Fourth was scientific communication alignment. And the fifth was defining the medical value proposition. And each of them has a description, and we used, since I'm a big believer in graphics, we used sort of an area of focus, clinical development, got a little test tube and so on. All right, my screen has frozen now. I don't know if you can see me.
Yeah, I can certainly still see the slide, Ornah, but you can't move on.
Okay, I don't know why. I can't move it forward now.
Oh.
Okay, there it is. It suddenly, okay. And this is the impact. So we put on the horizontal line is are the drivers, and on the vertical line are the priority initiatives. And this is done in a team. You can do this on a global level, you can do this on a regional level, on a country level, inside medical affairs, only with therapeutic area. So it's a very versatile tool. And the idea was to do this sort of button, the lever. How much does, for example, the clinical development governance modeling, how valuable is it with the alignment with corporate strategy? How much value is it with commercial enablement, and so on and so on. The levers at this point are not specific. They're just a demo. But this was a very compelling outcome for people when they saw this, to see how much medical is trying and focused on being a partner with the global and other functions in the company. The third tool I'd like to talk about is the medical operating model. The operating model is built from three basic questions. Who are we? What do we do? And how do we provide value? Who are we is something I'm not going to address because it's very, very specific to an organization. And it depends, for example, if there's a regional structure, yes or no. So a regional structure, I'm sure you all have that experience. It's very complicated to manage. It sort of sits between countries and global and has a very specific way of working. Or should have a very specific way of working in order to be successful, and is responsible for ensuring there is no disconnect between countries and global. So if there's no regional structure, all of this is irrelevant. And so I decided that I will not look at it. It also is different, very different from companies that have a drug on the market versus companies that are preparing for launch, or if this is function that's focused on launch, etc. So, okay. So what's the issue with medical strategies? So very often what I would see is that the good people in global would sit and say, we're preparing for a launch. It's essential that we all speak the same language. Absolutely true. So this is the launch plan, and they bring in advisors and they do a lot of work, and then they would come to country level, let's say, and they would say, this is the launch plan, and then the country people would look at it and say, we can't do anything with this. It's not relevant for our country. It won't, the competitors are different here. The messaging isn't right. Doctors here don't practice that way. I'd like to use this opportunity just for a small story. One of the things, at some point I was responsible for South America, and I was working on a drug on a neuropsychiatric drug, and there were some problems in Brazil. And we went there only to find out that in Brazil, the gynecologist acts as a GP for women. That's where they go for everything, not just for OBGYN, but for everything. He's like a GP. That's how it works there. This is something that would never be a part of a global strategy when you target your KOLs and you prepare how you're going to, if you didn't know it, if you didn't have the insight from a country level, you would never include this in a global strategy. So that's my point about lack of global context. Local has unique healthcare systems, regulations, cultural practices, to the story, patient needs that are very specific to every country and so on. So if you don't incorporate local insights, strategy will not resonate. The other thing is a version on that. It's the one-size-fits-all approach. Even a well-designed global strategy will not be able to be flexible enough to accommodate all the variations that can occur on a local level. And then there are communication gaps, and that we see very well, apropos speaking of silos. The limited buy-in, well, when the strategy is developed on a global level without adequate input, people will say yes, but won't do yes. So, and then there's a skills gap. The inadequate adaptability, I think, is a version of the above, but the skills gap. Sorry, on a local level, you might not have the same, same amount of medical advisors, the same level of internal knowledge, and so on. So, so it might not be you might not be able to execute on a global strategy. So, in order to address that, this is how we came. This is what we came out with. The medical operating model, what do we do? So we had 3 colors, again, very simple: medical strategy and capabilities, collaboration, and infrastructure. And we did this. This is a specific example that was done on a well, it's not a country level, but a small cluster of countries, which had the same sort of culture and a very similar language. And so this was done in order to exactly see that what is available on a country level and how can they provide value, considering what they have, what skill sets they have, what SOP catalog they have compared to global, what's the governance modeling, etc. One of the things we found out, and again, it was a revelation for me at least, was the General Manager Roadshow. It's on the left of this slide. And we found out that this is our most powerful tool. So what we did was we would go from country to country, and I'll show you another slide on this, and we would present the global medical affairs and the country level, or the regional and the country, depending on the specific company, to the general managers, and do exactly this. This is the medical operating model. This is what we do. This is what's available on a country level. This is the global strategy. These are the challenges. This is where we're missing things. And this was an absolute outstanding success. It turns out that that's one of the things that the general managers really wanted. They wanted to be aware of what's going on in global, even on a medical level, but they also wanted something more structured from the local medical affairs department. So when we did the recommendations, this is the description of the recommendations. This is just an example. Again, it could be absolutely, totally different. This is an example of what was relevant for a specific company. We came up with a list of recommendations. And again, we put the roadshow before. It was a good idea, but this is not because we already knew that this was successful. This was done before. And we assessed each one of them with the levers, goal, audience, and the impact. So roadshow for general managers to showcase the vision of medical and dialogue with them about how medical can support the countries. And the goal was building the bond with general managers, and also an opportunity to get to know their ideas about medical and what they think is valuable about medical, or what is not. And then the audience would be, of course, the general managers and the country medical directors. And the impact was the insights. And then you take those insights, instead of the example of taking the strategy from global to, dumping, if you like, the strategy from global to local, actually percolating this up and saying, these are the solutions that they need on a country level, which was, by the way, very appreciated by the general managers, who also sometimes feel that global doesn't listen. So here is an example of a couple of countries, 4 countries, and we prioritized the recommendations according to what those countries wanted, which was, again, almost revolutionary in its thinking. The recommendations were built by the medical teams in the country and the region. This happens to be happened to be a global organization, so it was relevant for them. It could be more relevant, and it could be less relevant. So, for example, the clinical development and cluster process formulation was low in one country, but was high for the other countries, which was absolutely fine. And it gave people a very good idea also of how to work with other countries, because Some countries it was low because they already had it very well and very mature. So there was a learning that the countries could support each other. And there were things that were prioritized across the board, for example, as medium. So that was a good thing to know. Again, the visuals, we did this in a way that was, we were very, very clear that we needed to show something quite quickly, within 3 to 6 months. So we had quick wins, medium term and long term, but also how difficult it would be to implement. As you can see, the general manager roadshow is the first on the recommendation, because it's a quick win and it was relatively. You would need to really prepare for this, but other than that, it's not resource intense in that sense. You don't need anything specific. And so this is how we positioned this for every single country. In this case, I think we were 32 countries. And then we asked them to choose the top 5 initiatives in terms of potential benefit, and to span the entire spectrum in terms of time and difficulty. So this was again the choice of the teams locally. So I'd like to summarize here. The Medical Affairs Alchemy is a framework. It's tools that are very easy to understand, which is some people think they're simplistic, but I think they resonate so well that we all understand them. They're designed to effectively communicate the value and impact of medical affairs, and it crosses audiences, geographies, functions, companies, and products. They're carefully crafted to ensure that the message resonates with stakeholders, again, irregardless even of their countries and backgrounds, while upholding the highest standards of medical integrity and ethics. There was not a single word around, as you saw, sales, money, or anything like that. By leveraging these tools, I would like to perhaps stop and say that, again, it's a framework. What I've shown you is a couple of tools. They don't work on just taking one tool. I mean, of course it does to a degree, but it needs to be rolled out. And there's a lot of effort that goes before choosing the tools and before populating the tools, that in understanding the company and medical affairs, and in understanding other functions and the challenges of these companies. So this is just a sort of a taste, if you like, of the things that can be done. So by leveraging these tools, medical affairs can bridge the gap between global strategies and local execution. And then there's a shared understanding of the critical role that medical affairs plays in driving healthcare innovation and improving outcomes. These tools are adaptable. I think that's the crucial thing. They work in any organization, in any context. And through a commitment to a clear, concise, and culturally sensitive communication, this framework can empower its users to effectively convey the scientific and clinical value of their work. And then it's, does all the good things like strengthen collaboration, trust, and alignment among the medical affairs teams worldwide, and it ensures that medical affairs strategies are not just globally consistent, but also locally relevant. And I think that's the sweet spot, the sweet spot where you would like to be: globally consistent, locally relevant. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ornah, for a fascinating journey into medical affairs. Actually, it chimes very well with me. When I think back to my last, perhaps 20 so years in and around medical affairs, and I was an MSL 20 years ago when really questions were being asked with the first MSL teams. Where's the value here? Where do we see the uptick on return on investment in MSLs? And I think, just thinking back on many experiences, if we had a defined toolkit a framework to refer back to in developing plans, as you say, both globally consistent and acting locally. It would have been a very powerful thing for in our toolkit. So thank you, Ornah, for sharing this with us today. But really, that's enough for me sharing my experience. But perhaps if there's any questions or comments amongst the group today, please put up your hand. I see a hand from Neil, actually. Neil.
Hi, yeah. I had one of those sort of iconoclastic questions about global strategy, because I'm purely from an agency background. I've never worked in pharma, so I've worked with both medical affairs at global and EU level, and the same with commercial. And one thing that keeps coming back is how relevant is global strategy to local markets? And this is why I thought this is quite interesting, particularly when global strategy, and actually it doesn't really matter if it's commercial or medical, but it's actually worse with commercial, I think, is largely US dominated. It's the biggest market. And so many pharma companies now base their global team in the US and mistake the US for global. And then you've got to sort of unpick all of that to try and stop the French and the Brits all throwing it in the bin and going, well, we're not using that. Absolute waste of time and money. And it's an absolute uphill struggle.
Yes.
And that's why I thought this was quite interesting, because it kind of acknowledges that, if I've got it right, that actually a very, very tightly defined strategy, and you will do this by this date in this way with these audiences, doesn't really work. What you need is almost like a toolkit, as you've put forward, that allows people to flex according to their local markets. The problem is that the global people, often in the US, hate that because they can feel control slipping away. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I just wondered, I mean, is it iconoclastic to say, am I just being difficult to say that actually global strategy doesn't really work? I mean, it's great. It keeps a lot of global people very busy and keeps their agencies very busy. And some things do work, like a decent publication strategy, because it's bedrock support tools, things that support activities, but does a strategy which actually in any way dictates what you do in the run up to launch. I mean, I'll give you an example. Sorry to run on, but my last agency, without going to sort of contract breaking details, we were the US team cheerfully sold the global team on the idea of a patient support program. And they said, oh, we can just roll it out in Europe, can't we? I said, no, you can't.
No.
Not unless you want to go to prison or your medical directors to go to prison. You can't do it in France at all unless you just want to hand over the money to a third party and let them do it. And there's this shock. And you sort of think, that's the problem with global strategy developed in the US in that sort of way. So, can global strategy ever really work? What do you think? Do you think it does work?
Well, thank you very much, Neil. I mean, that was really, music to my ears, because I've been saying this for years. I have a favorite example from one of the companies that I read the global strategy, and all it talked about was the FDA. And I was, there are other regulatory bodies here and there, just,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
When you get copy all written in American English for people to just deploy, I mean, we're not doing that. And it is quite astonishing. And so my question stands. Or, in the way that you've been talking about a bit, do we need to just really radically rethink what on earth global strategy is? And by saying that, will I ever work again?
Well, your secret is safe with us, but I completely agree with you. So I think you said something around that's where I think I stand is global strategy should be global for things that can and should and must be global. For example, a scientific communication strategy.
Yeah.
And that also, by the way, it's nice if it includes also country or at least regional scientific communication strategy.
Absolutely.
As well. And label, for example, label has to be global, unless the label is, but the language of the label, you know how it is. These are something that are tightly regulated and controlled and can have an enormous impact on the commercials, and also can put a country in liability because differences in label. You know, there are people who do that. They check that the label is the same in every country, and if it isn't, they take the country to court. So there are things that are absolutely must be, but otherwise you really have to allow for local adaptation. And I think my Brazil point was, you know, I mean, it's a small story, right? But it's so poignant because that's exactly the problem. We weren't targeting the right doctors because it wasn't relevant. So that's how I see it. There are things that really must be dictated and things but of course, I mean, I don't see any pharma located in the US ever doing that, no offense. But but that's, I mean, what actually happens today, right? Let's be quite honest, is that people on a country level, let's say Germany, they look at the strategy from the US, they nod their heads, and then they go and do their own thing. So at least, at the very least, it would be great if the company said, look, on this, we're not going to compromise, like what you said, scientific communication strategy. Everything else, as long as you stick to the local label and regulations, it's up to you how you do it. And again, you're measured on.
So that's really interesting. Sorry, just to ramble on a bit, but you're moving away from global being a dictatorship to an enabler. Ooh. And that's, I know, radical, huh? Radical. It's a really interesting thought, though, that instead of saying this is how it has to be, because they're obsessed with brand kind of consistency globally, but you get your brand consistency out of data, maybe your message platform, if you feel so inclined, that sort of thing. But everything else is just helping the markets do the best they can for the brand, for the product, maybe. And stop trying to set everything in stone and spending an enormous amount of money doing it with some, very expensive vendors, maybe. I don't know.
Yes, of course, it's a business, right? So no one wants to ruin the business for everyone. But in fact, that is probably a better way forward than what we're seeing today. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I even worked, many years ago for a European company, and then it established a subsidiary in the US, and the US subsidiary was like it overtook.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, you try working with GSK, which is a British company, and they're all based in the US, and they're all a lot of them American, and that's fine. That's all good because they're bright, clever people, and they kind of, a lot get it. And they actually quite like having Europeans contributing because it kind of reminds them that there is a market outside the US. It can work remarkably well, but there is a sort of industry-wide, it's that very top-down command and control structure that I'm not sure works. Whether it'll ever change, I don't know, but
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a very
anyway, I'll shut up now because I know someone else wants to say something, and I'm just talking too much as usual.
And for any US global colleagues, we do like you, honestly.
Yeah, we do.
Absolutely, it's just a way of doing things. Absolutely.
The people usually, they're bright, they're hardworking. Really want to do well. It's just a different kind of point of view. Yeah.
Let's move on, Steve.
Yeah, just reflecting on what you're saying. A lot of the function of the medical affairs is very strategic, long-term, that sort of thing. Where that challenge differs with the field team, the MSLs, and there's always been this debate about what's the value, if I dare use that word without using the dollar meaning of it, the impact of the MSLs short-term. Are we any closer to actually cracking that one and showing their impact?
I mean, everyone talks about that, right? I mean, that's really, you've really, touched that pain point. So MSL, I think, is the classic example of where medical affairs fails to show how they provide value. Because what do they measure? How many emails have they been sending, or how many phone calls they've had with a KOL? They don't measure anything about changing that KOL's not even changing his opinion, maybe just or changing his prescribing habits, but sort of being interested in doing a study. I mean, it's impossible. It's almost impossible to measure. We did actually an experiment on that in one of the companies I worked with, and it was a newly established. There was no no MSL function before, and they decided to put, I think, 6 MSLs. Sorry, in preparation for a very complicated launch, and we asked. This was part of our general manager thing. We asked the general manager if we could do a small kind of a pilot study on this. And what we did was we gave the MSL 6 messages. And they were written in level of importance. And then he, she would go, they would go to the KOL and have a discussion. And then we had a third party that would call the KOL maybe a week later and say, you had a visit from so-and-so. What did they talk to you about? Yeah, and that turned out to be, it was very hard to do that, it could only work when it was designed as a study, but it was obviously meant for, I did it because I wanted the general managers to realize, anyway, long story, and the MSLs, by the way, got their bonus structure based on this as well, on recollection, the KOL's recollection of the key messages. The outcome was that the following year I had 6 MSL departments in 6 different countries when the general managers were shown the results of this, because it was very, very it was very effective. These weren't complicated messages, but they were the messages we wanted, right? It doesn't matter. The treatment of lupus nephritis is not as good as it could be, because effectiveness tends to wane after age 50, whatever it was, the message, right? These were all scientific messages, so there was nothing about, so that was the way we did it, but it was very, very, that is the most difficult thing, is to measure MSL effectiveness, especially that sales rep costs so much less. They're much cheaper than, one of the things that I do thank our American colleagues for is that they're restricting access to doctors so much that only an MSL can get in many places. And so it's creating a kind of an environment where companies are starting to rely on MSLs, because there's really no other way to get face time or to get in front of a doctor. Another thing we did for a while that was pretty good, that was pre-pandemic, so the infrastructure wasn't quite there yet, but we had an MSL on demand. So the rep would go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, oh, something off-label. And the rep would say, I'm sorry, doctor, I'm not allowed to speak about this, but here's my iPad, and I'm going to connect you to our MSL on call, and I'll exit the room, and you can have a discussion with them. And that was also very effective. How to measure that in business, that is really, if anyone has a good idea, I'm really happy to hear.
I think it's the holy grail as well. From my experience, often in commercial, heading up those analytics teams. So there's data there, but of course, as part of commercial. Right. And then goes the firewall, but the independent running of that, or data that might be coming through, company portals at the moment on publications pulled down, for example. If a non-commercial person could analyze that data, potentially it's becoming easier, hopefully.
Yeah. But also, you said download a publication. So someone downloaded a public. What does it mean? What does it actually mean, right?
Yep.
That is, yeah. It's an area that's begging for more studies and more data, and to find out how to do it.
Or a group of experts who can help clients. Yeah.
Yes, for example.
Yeah. Precisely that.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry, I see a comment from Bob,
yes.
But he says he's on a train and a bus, So as you have said, the value of medical affairs is not always seen and appreciated. I have personally seen it restructured, reorganized up teams times, and also moved from R&D to, that's true, to commercial, as well as together with other affairs, government affairs, public affairs, legal, etc. Yeah, I actually, just reminds me, I had a friend whose son asked her, what are these affairs you're having? You know, she was working in medical affairs, so you learned the word affairs. Yes. Where do you believe it should sit in pharma organization? I see it as a critical partner for commercial and clearly R&D as well. Yeah, so this is right. This is another big pain point for medical affairs, and thank you for highlighting that. We're kind of coming to the end of the hour, but he's right. I mean, when I joined pharma, medical affairs set under commercial, yeah, today it would be almost unthinkable, but yeah. And it's been moved around, and I think medical feels most comfortable, obviously, in places where there's no, it's non-commercial, be it directly to the CMO, which is a great place to sit, because you get that closeness to R&D that that isn't always happening in organizations, and you can get more involved in the later phases, so phase 2 and onwards, where they often, you know, I mean, historically, sometimes medical affairs didn't even give input to phase 2 studies or phase 3, and somehow they would be remembered for phase 4 and post, you know, and investigator-sponsored studies. So yeah, I found that having been everywhere except for in the general affairs, I would say that I would feel more, I felt most comfortable reporting directly to the CMO with together with R&D. And typically the CMO is also someone who has a deep scientific background, so there's a kind of a good basis for communication. That's all I can say to Bob. I hope that kind of okay.
Bob agrees.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Thank you, Ken. Okay, so I guess I will thank everyone for a really good discussion. I'm not sure I have all the answers for everything, but perhaps a few ideas this has given you, and looking forward possibly to working with some of you through Phraktion. Hopefully.
No doubt, Ornah. And
okay.
Thank you for
saying no. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for great efforts today, and in the build up to the presentation. Ornah, I know you put a huge amount of work into it, and I think just an important reminder to us all that, you know, medical affairs is still on its journey, I think, to establishing itself as the third pillar in the industry, of course, but I think we're well into that journey now. But I think probably still some of the stresses and strains around the system about where really is the value, and I think the more we can do that in a systematic way, as you describe today, Ornah, I think the better for medical affairs, the industry, and, you know, ultimately the patients, of course. So thank you for sharing. So with that, thank you, Ornah. Thank you, everybody, for your joining and lively interaction, as always, for the webinars, and look forward to seeing you perhaps as soon as next week